So welcome everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our next EMS webinar speaker, Professor Andrea Schäfer. Andrea is a professor of water process engineering and the founding director of the Institute for Advanced Membrane Technology at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. Previously, she was professor at the Nelson Mandela African Institute of Science and Technology in Tanzania. She was the chair of environmental engineering at the University of Edinburgh, and also later senior lecturer at the University of Wollongong. And she spent some time at the University of New South Wales, both in Australia. She holds 4 engineering degrees from 3 different countries, including Germany, France, and Australia. Actually, she obtained her PhD from the UNESCO Center for Membrane Science and Technology at the University of New South Wales. She's passionate about membrane process engineering with a long-term vision about a dream, safe water for all children. This is the topic of her presentation today, but first, let's get to know Andrea a little bit better. So thank you for being here. And let me ask you the first question. How did you get into membranes?
So firstly, great. Thank you for inviting me, Georgie, and apologies for this absolutely catastrophic failure today with I had to change laptop. So how did I get into membranes? I met Heino Stratman when I was 8 years old. So he was working in the company where I grew up, and my dad was in charge of locking up in the evenings, and he was usually the guy who was still there when the building was to be locked. And so 10 years later, someone in the same company showed me how to make tubular membranes. I still remember this very vividly. Rudy Graf, he seemed to live off formaldehyde, and he really loved membranes. And he showed me the book of Robert Rautenbach with the cherry in it and the osmotic pressure. And I just thought this was super cool. So I decided it was to be membranes. And then in my first degree, there was no course about membranes. So I wanted to carry on. Finally, in France, in my master's, there was a course on membranes. And I then wanted to really stay with this.
Okay. And why did you decide to actually do a PhD? You could have stopped there and not pursue a PhD at all.
Well, firstly, I felt after a master's that I didn't know anything. And then during my master's, I had been to New Zealand. I went for an internship and to work on membranes. I removed quinic acid from kiwi fruit juice, as you do in New Zealand. And I totally fell in love with membranes, a man, and a country. And so there was this moment in the lab where I had written up my results and I showed them to the boss, and he came back and said, wow, this is good stuff. And that was just really, really cool. And I felt I had found my place in research. And then a PhD was really the next logical step to do that.
Mm-hmm. But then you still, after the PhD, you could have gone back to the industry right away, but then you decided to work in academia. So what made you make that choice?
It's interesting because it wasn't a choice. I was absolutely set to go to the industry. I actually asked my friends to make sure I get out of there. And then I got a job in industry with Xenon, and I fell pregnant. And then I figured out that actually I don't think industry could cope with a pregnant woman, and I decided not to take that risk. And I also was a bit worried that the R&D job would turn into a sales job. And so I decided to stay in academia. It helped tremendously that my supervisor had kind of foreseen, and he had come up with a project that was funded on micropollutant removal. And that again was a complete fit to where I felt at home in terms of the environmental impacts. And so I stayed.
Interesting. And I hope no regrets there. So
Depends on the day.
what do you like about being a professor?
What do I like about a professor? I think number one is the freedom. I think the being able to do what we want and be totally self-reliant and self-responsible. I think this is what really keeps me motivated and in the position. I think being able to follow my curiosity, to be able to play in the lab. I mean, not so much anymore, but now I'm playing through other people. And I think just this being able to decide on my own destiny and have the impact that I want to have. And that through many channels. So firstly, through education, through research to innovation to impact. And also there's other things, of course, in academia, but that's freedom. If we want to go to a conference, if we want to visit colleagues, we can do that. And that to me is a value that is just not, you can't exchange that for a huge salary.
Mm-hmm. And what is the impact that you are hoping for? What are you trying to achieve as a long-term goal in your career?
Well, I think that's what we're going to talk about today in the seminar. So what I really want to achieve is have an impact. Bring membranes into water and ultimately make sure that we have the technology out there in all the places so no child, and of course then also no adult, will die of unsafe water anymore. And I think if that has been achieved in whatever contribution I can make, then I can retire one day and say it was worth it.
I like that goal, and I like the title of your presentation, which is Membranes in Water, the long and bumpy road to save water for all children. So Andrea, it's a pleasure to have you, and the stage is yours. We're gonna get back to you with the questions at the end of your talk. So everyone will write their questions in the chat, and then I will read them out loud, and then we can go through them one by one.
Okay, super. So thank you very much. And yes, membranes in water, the long and bumpy road to save water for all children. And for those who know me, they know that I can get very frustrated, but I can also be very enthusiastic. And I think those two emotions are just really part of that journey and part of being alive. So I have a dream, save water for all children. I think probably now is the moment when I can tell you where this came from. I was promoted to full professor 5 years from PhD. Now, this wasn't luck. Looking back now, it was a result of extreme work effort, extreme energy. And when I was promoted to professor, I thought, what on earth now? I now achieved this goal that most people spend most of their lives. So what am I going to achieve now? And then I remembered this promise I made on the back of a truck hitching in Africa, as you do as a student, where people were so enthusiastic that we were engineering students and they made us promise, come back and help us one day. I forgot this as life got busy. And then at that moment, I remembered. And I really thought, okay, here's something where I, as a membranologist, really can contribute. So let's go about doing that. Now, this work is a collaboration with Bryce, my now husband, and our 4 kids who have really taken part in a lot of trips there. And, our kids, they fight over who gets to take the next water sample. I have to add, this picture is now about a bit more than 10 years old. So now it's not so sweet anymore. Now we're in mid-teenage and beyond. But it has been really an incredible journey, and you will see a lot of the pictures. So a little bit to my development. I got into membranes in 1989, roughly, when I finished school around that time. I then studied at the University of Applied Sciences. I then made a bold move and went to France to do a master's, or an engineering degree, as it's called there. Then the PhD at UNSW at the UNESCO Center, Uni Wollongong, Edinburgh as a chair professor, Africa for a year as professor. And since 2014, I'm at KIT. Now, in the process, I moved a lot with the family and I set up a lot of labs. I always thought this was horrendous friction, and I was quite envious of people who were able to stay in the same place all the time. But I realized that every move was a huge step change. It was usually a very, very big improvement in what we could do in the new facilities. Just came with a lot of development in me. So we're looking essentially at always water and processes, how contaminants are removed, typically in pressure-driven membranes. And then when I moved to KIT, I was really quite frustrated with our commercial membranes that we get, because they're usually black boxes. And I felt I can't really understand anything. And so I wanted to gain control about membranes. And quite interestingly, people then, materials collaborators, they said, well, what membrane would you like ideally? And I realized I have no idea. And then I realized, well, most of us have no idea. And so we have been looking at developing a cool toolbox. We called that nanomembrane in the beginning. I got funding, lifelong funding as a huge fellowship. And with that, I set up the membrane technology department and later the Institute for Advanced Membrane Technology. So what I'm really looking for is, how can I use my skills to have the biggest possible impact? And that is really to save these child deaths of water. So that's where I would like to go and carry on this journey. Now, to come back a bit to KIT, KIT is one of the top technical universities in Germany. We're on the border to France in the southwest of Germany. And in 2009, the university merged with the largest research center of Helmholtz. It was once upon a time the Nuclear Research Center. And so that merged. We have a number of campuses in Karlsruhe, on the Zugspitze, the highest mountains, and various places in town. And we're funded mostly by the state, but also by the Helmholtz Association. And once upon a time, 1864, this technical university inspired the MIT. So what are we doing at IMT? I'd like to say we're doing material to process approach for research. We're looking at novel materials, although I'm clearly not an expert in making membranes. We do some modifications or coatings, or we collaborate a lot with experts in membrane manufacturing. We then look at membrane transport mechanisms, removal or destruction of pollutants, and we develop that into processes that may be for desalination, that may be for reuse or for renewable. More technical problems.
We can see you and we can hear you again. We lost you for a moment.
Okay, so I'll go back. Thank you. So
Okay.
yeah, we do a lot of collaborations, and because the IMT is quite a small institute, we thrive really from a lot of colleagues that we have fun with and collaborate. Now, typically our approach deals with pores, nanopores, membrane pores.
Andrea, excuse me, we cannot see your slide.
Oh dear.
Please share your screen again.
Share. So we back?
Perfect, yes.
So I think it's an internet problem. So hopefully it will be more stable. So the work we do at IMT, the approach we take, is about pores. It's nanopores, anywhere from microfiltration to nanofiltration. And we're looking at what happens in these pores. It's usually pressure-driven membrane processes, but not only. But let's just focus on this now. So pollutants are either able to go across the membrane, get into the pores or not. In nanofiltration, we work with the rejection. Once the pollutants are in there, we have a drag force, we may have friction, a reaction, repulsion, and adhesion. So this is the kind of space we're working with. We have incredible laboratories that I have built in the last 10 years. We have a lot of instruments for micropollutant analysis, so we can work at the relevant concentrations, both organic and inorganic. We always look at real water validation, so looking for environmental situation of what the waters are. And we have in our membrane toolbox, say, nanofiltration, nanoadsorption, nanophotocatalysis or electrocatalysis. We have an incredible suite of experimental characterization tools, small scale up to pilot scale, so from 2.5 centimeter diameter up to pilot scale. And then we do a lot of limiting factor analysis, as I may say. It's relatively boring experiments once we know how to do them. And on average, we for publication, we have usually about 50 experiments with 10 to 15 samples. So this explains why we need all this analytical tools, because there's just no one who will do this kind of scale of analysis with us. Once we have nice materials, we upscale, and you see here our new mobile laboratory that we just have used for the first time last summer. And so this is really what we're working on in general. global challenges we're dealing with in water are firstly viruses and bacteria. They are responsible to destroy the, they are responsible for the child mortality, but we don't work with viruses and bacteria because our processes remove them anyhow. So these ones, for us, we have multiple barriers to remove them. And then we focus on the dissolved contaminants, the salts, the arsenic, the fluoride, the nitrate, uranium. So this is our main research focus. Then we look at macromolecules. This is what I did my PhD on. So these humic substances, natural organic matters, they are not hazardous by themselves, but they cause color and taste and odor. They form carcinogenic byproducts when you chlorinate them, and they are responsible for fouling. And then lastly, we're working on micropollutants. This is the very low concentration contaminants that cause endocrine disruption, fertility issues, cancer. So this is a lot. This is another half of our main research is in this area, but that's not what we're talking about today. So today I would like to give you a snapshot of the last more than 20 years of research on this topic of renewable energy powered membrane filtration. And as part of this, I spent 18 months in Tanzania, 2012 to 2014. And there I learned a lot of what is needed and what can be done. Now I'd like to go back a little bit to the history of this. So the question really was, can membranes be a suitable technology in water? And I remember after my PhD, I was invited to a water strategy meeting where the next 7 years strategy was discussed. This was in Australia in 2000. And as a fresh PhD graduate, I just said, don't worry, guys, in 7 years, it will all be membranes. It was not a moment to win friends. I just would like to switch the camera off so we have maybe a bit more bandwidth. Okay. And so, well, what was it all about? It's too complicated, too expensive, too energy consuming. So I reflected on that and I decided to run a membrane short course for industry because water and wastewater treatment, mostly civil engineers at the time, they didn't have membranes in their curriculum. So of course it was too complicated. The cost I found in my PhD, it was actually cheaper to use nanofiltration than to have more and more and more coagulants added. And the energy, well, with that, I turned to my now husband and said, well, you're doing a PhD in solar energy, photovoltaics. Can't you help me? And with that, an idea was born, and that we coupled photovoltaics with membranes. We got a small but very significant funded project from UNSW as I became a lecturer. And then we, of course, didn't have a lot of money. So we recruited students from all disciplines to work on this project. They didn't get any credit for this, and 40 of them showed up. And none of them had prior water wastewater courses. So we went to the lab, we built prototypes, and really the first one was to show that a pump and a membrane could produce water. Then we had a student-led team, which was quite interesting, how all the dynamics of this unfolded. Michelle was the manager, and so this was very, very cool. We did some very exciting field work, very nerve-wracking. We often left without the equipment already built, so we did it there. And yes, in the end, the last field trip, 2005, went to the center of Australia. It was just the most incredible experience you can imagine. We really learned so much, all of us, and it's very, very clear now that such adventures, they need a lot of institutional backing and support because things can go wrong, and I'm incredibly grateful that nothing ever seriously has gone wrong. Now, what are we doing? So we have this system and we're trying to see if a small-scale system directly coupled with renewable energy, no batteries, can dissolve contaminants in remote areas. So we built this prototype, I think it was our number 6 or 7, and we took that to the center of Australia, and we learned a lot. Firstly, we made rain. So it hadn't rained for 18 months, and suddenly we were flooding in every direction, which wasn't really a very nice picture for all our experiments because we did need the sun. And then we were really in a state of desperation because we were really taught to change one parameter at a time, and with fluctuating energy, everything changed all the time. So we started learning a lot about methodology. We knew that ultrafiltration and nanofiltration versus osmosis was the right process. We did a lot of fundamental work while we were in the field. We looked at ion hydration, we looked at uranium speciation, started some molecular dynamics. So we really made this a very broad research topic that has been going on now for nearly 25 years. And on the side, we talked to people, to the users, to communities, and we interviewed them and we made them taste the water. And it's really been an incredible journey. So the idea in itself, well, it's coupling membranes with renewable energy. It can be solar, it can be wind. We have electronics. We have no batteries because they get usually stolen first and we lose some efficiency with having batteries in the system. And in the first major prototype, we had submerged ultrafiltration membranes in there. They came from the bioreactors, and I really felt, well, they are robust. They can treat wastewater, so surely they can treat any water. And with that, we worked for quite some time. There's a second important concept in there, and that is that we usually operate at low recovery. So if we have a groundwater that's not too salty, that has uranium or fluoride or something in it, then our idea was, well, let's use about 10 to 30% of the water for drinking, and let's use the rest for other things such as showering or washing or animal feeding. And if we do that, then we don't have a waste stream. So we then needed renewable energy data. That's not so easy to get, but we tried to see how that looks like, what we could expect from such a system. And our capacity of design was really 5 liters per person and day for drinking, and another 20 liters for other things. And that meant with one 4-inch module, we could have about 200 people receive water. Now, bear in mind, 5 liters per person per day, 20 with other uses. We are in the Germany or other places, we're probably around 150 liters per person per day. So it's quite different, but of course it's a huge change to having to carry water. Now, where are we and where is the target? Well, first of all, we have a need where people have neither clean drinking water nor electricity. And per year, several million die because they don't have access to water. And that's a lot of children, 1,000 per day. That's a lot of parents who lose children. And a lot of these are, of course, in rural areas because of the United Nations Development Goals. If their targets need to be met, they are met in areas where the numbers are higher, such as more in urban areas. So in the rural areas, this is really, really hard. And the infrastructure to put water and electricity in there is prohibitive. We're focused on dissolved contaminants. We're looking at surface and brackish water, fluoride, arsenic, uranium nitrate, and the like, and organic matter. And these are just hard to remove contaminants that warrant advanced technology. And then we look at variability of water quality, and we focus on the water energy nexus. Usually in those rural areas, there's neither water nor reliable power, and hence this coupling makes a lot of sense. Now, experimentally, this was challenging because we go out to the field and we depend on the weather. So if we change the membrane or we change the water, this isn't really what we're getting in our experimental queries. We just get a reflection of the weather or the situation. And so what we developed over the years is a controlled way of fluctuations that meant to do a lot of fundamental studies of fluctuations. It meant getting solar data that had some of these fluctuations incorporated. And then we are using a solar array simulator that gives us the response of a solar panel when we feed in the irradiance data. And with that, we could then do experiments on a particular location, even in our lab. And that was, of course, a huge improvement for our data quality. So in terms of the field work, well, we went to Central Australia. That was our first big trip in 2005. We went to Ghana. It was my first trip back since the iconic Promise in 1992. So we went back to Ghana in 2007 and 2010. We went to Tanzania for 18 months, 12 to 14, and since then to Senegal and Gambia. And there's probably some other trips to yet come, but it's been really amazing journeys. Now, why Tanzania? 18 months. Well, it's because Tanzania has very fascinating environment. It's relatively stable until recently, and it has the highest fluoride concentrations in the world and also very high organic matter concentrations in an environment where it's just absolutely fascinating. And I was always really drawn to the environment. I regretted in Australia that I didn't study marine biology with all the people going diving. But when I was in Tanzania, and you see the bottom left, you see the giraffe behind me, I really felt, wow, this is it. I finally found the place. But we arrived. It was a great adventure. We took the family, and I bought a car. We took our trailer, and all the cars on the boat that we shipped on had a broken clutch. So we started in the workshop, and this was pretty much how it stayed. So it was just an endless adventure of incredible frustration and incredible joy, as it is. So what was the problem? Fluoride in the water in Tanzania. Firstly, the kids have all brown teeth. They don't like to laugh in the school because they're ashamed of their teeth. But even worse than that, a lot of the kids have crippled bones. And then the treatment is that the doctors break those bones and realign them. And this is a problem we could solve by simply removing fluoride from the water. Now, I was not the first one who came there, and it was one of the reasons I chose to go there is because there was people already working on this. Namely, there was Professor Eli Dahi from Denmark. He had set up the Ngordoto fluoride removal station, research station. And he had a very loyal researcher, Godfrey Makongo, who became our biggest helper. And so they developed this bone jars for household filters in communities. And when we first got there in this period of 2012 to 14, we were seen as a bit of competition, and we were laughed at a bit too advanced technology. I came back last year, and I didn't really think that much had changed, but I was greeted with, oh my God, the concentrations are going up and up. The absorption just doesn't work anymore, and we need to look at your technology. So it seemed like perfect timing now to implement some of these tools. Now, to go back to 2012, we arrived, one PhD student, one master student for a while, and our equipment. What we did first, as we usually do, is we sampled the water to figure out the worst case scenario. So we looked at 200 samples, and then we developed a schedule of experiments, firstly pressure, different water sources, different membranes, all at this research station. And then in the end, the last trip was then to go into 2 selected communities and do the work there. Of course, we're in the middle of nowhere. We can't store samples. So we really had a lot of challenges to solve. And this was, in my opinion, the main purpose of this trip. But we proved that one can do first-class research there, and we published something like 15 papers. Now, here's an example as we looked at the Machia Chai. Machia Chai means the tea water river. So you can see there in the middle that in the rainy season, it is very, very full of water and very brown water because the swamps get washed out the organic matter. And in the dry season, you can see salt precipitates, carbonates, and fluorides. And then, of course, the salinity is very high. We monitored this over a year, and we wanted to see if that causes problems to treatment. And we found that nanofiltration was indeed very stable in the water quality that can be achieved. Now, just a very few results. I don't have a lot of results in my talk. So I just want to show the nature of the work that we're doing. And it's very complicated data sets with data every second. You see in gray there the solar irradiance. You see some fluctuations. And then the pressure as the driving force mirrors the solar energy when you couple directly. And then we get a lot of data for all sorts of things from permeate quality to specific energy consumption or total water produced. So here an example of one of the parameters. This was the parameter where we looked at different membranes. So we're not using just reverse osmosis because that's the best. We're actually looking at, well, how far can we push it towards nanofiltration or open nanofiltration to really maximize acceptable water quality with volume produced. And you see here the permeate flux changes, of course, very, very much over the course of a day. The increase is due to temperature over a day. And you see that membrane choice makes a huge difference in productivity. See here changes from 700 liters per day to over 2,000. So this is almost a factor of 3, depending on the membrane that is used. Now, of course, one needs to look if the quality is fine. And if we look at that, well, we have 4 membranes here, and 3 of them can meet the water quality requirements for fluoride. 4 milligrams per liter in Tanzania, WHO 1.5, but one of the membrane was too open, so that couldn't do the job. And then you see that there is an increase with the fluctuation when the clouds come through. And in that situation, we really were waiting for drops of water to come out. And these drops of water that trickled out, because there was no water flow at the low energy, there we could see that there was a higher fluoride concentration, but this was totally irrelevant because there was so little volume. So this averaged out very, very quickly. Then this here is my favorite slide because it's the most exciting experimental day that I've ever experienced and probably will have. We chose a black water. And that's not tea water anymore because it's so black that I called it espresso water. We treated this water, and just really as a worst case scenario, you can see that the foaming of the organic matter, how we treated this black to very clear water, the data, really good. We had a hiccup because the ultrafiltration couldn't handle this water. We needed an air bubbler that couldn't be driven by the solar, but so we had a lot of ultrafiltration fouling, but the water quality was extremely good. It tasted great. And then I had a little bit of an awakening when the people were saying, no, we're not drinking this water. This water was black. This was bewitched. And there's no way your technology can remove that bad spirit of the water. That was something where I thought, okay, I think we need to look at this technology. And our collaborator there, he's the school headmaster. He drank the water. He was very enthusiastic, and he had a lot of UV systems installed. And he had packed them all into a Kilimanjaro. So he built a mountain with a box inside it. So he covered the technology such that people were drinking out of the mountain. And with that, it was fine. Now, here is the work of mostly, now this is ours still, but this is what we're looking at is the safe operating window. We're looking at what is the pump power, how does that match the maximum recovery of a module, the minimum recovery, how much pressure do we need to be able to get flow at all. So this is generally our safe operating window that we examine. We look at resilience. So if a cloud comes through, how long does the system require to pick up its performance again? And we're looking at organic matter removal. And there we've really hit the extremes. But the concentrations were so high, we've got nearly to 1 gram per liter organic matter. And what happened then was a really interesting finding is there was so many low molecular weight organics in the water that went through to the permeate that we had a lot of regrowth in the permeate. And because we couldn't refrigerate the samples, that really destroyed quite a lot of data for us, but it was a very interesting learning that these small organics, they are really causing the regrowth. And then we found out about osmotic backwash. So whenever these clouds come, the pressure stops and the permeate goes back to the feed side. And we had since then a very interesting PhD looking at if such osmotic backwash can be used for membrane cleaning. So then we have the work of Bryce. He's bringing the energy to this, and he's doing a lot of work there on looking at energy fluctuation, looking at tracking of the sun, using the energy efficiency. At the middle of the day, we produce too much. So how can we use this energy to store it for later? And then also, even though we don't want classical lithium-ion batteries, he also looks at how can we reduce the shutdowns with supercapacitors, and is it really beneficial to work with or without energy buffering? And most lately now, this is probably a very good use for KI or AI, is they've been looking at the clouds to try and forecast what is coming in terms of solar irradiance to predict that. Okay, now socioeconomics. Is it realistic to put nanofiltration into developing countries, into rural areas? And I was, for the best of 20 years, laughed at because this is clearly not viable. But in 2007, we traveled around Ghana and we asked people what they're paying for water. And so what they told me is they're paying up to $10 or $12 per cubic meter for the water. And at that point, I realized we can do any membrane filtration. This too expensive argument is simply false, and it breaks really on the quantity of water. People use so little, they pay so much, and this is really making the business case for membranes. So we need to look at the poor reputation of technology. A lot of people build systems, put them there, they fail, and then that says membranes don't work. It just means they weren't operated properly, and that's something which we need to deal with. So what are the challenges that hinder the implementation? And in other words, what is fueling my frustration? So firstly, the capital costs are a challenge. So while the treatment costs are not so high, one needs to bring this investment, and that is of course too much for a small community. Aid organizations are probably more conservative than the water industry, and they just don't have confidence in this technology. And the market is huge, but it's not yet ready. So we see a lot of companies that pick up the ideas and they come and go. Then we have the operation and maintenance that is challenging, and that's something we want to do some work on, because I think if one puts these systems in, one needs to operate them, and that requires quite a lot of creative business models. Technologically, of course, there's still fouling and scaling. Calcium and hardness are issues that haven't been solved. And we are using water in Tanzania, which is what I would say a low-hanging fruit because there's no calcium. So the fouling and the scaling is not a big issue, but it needs to be solved. For some waters where the concentrates are too high to be in concentration, to be used for something else, that needs looking at, see how that can be used. And of course, we have theft, protection, sabotage, liability. People steal, they take, they sabotage things. And also you may be saving 1,000 kids' life, but maybe one will die and then you're still liable. So there's issues to be dealt with that are also non-technical. And what I would say the most important one is the skill, and not just in developing countries, also where we are. I'm finding that there is very little interest in real engineering, in process engineering. I have my outbursts about MOFs and 2D materials and all these kind of things. I think we need some really good, the best engineers who can do process engineering and solve these huge problems, challenges, but also have an opportunity to have huge impact and a lot of fun. So things to be done. Now, where are we going to here? And for me, always the question, I'm only an academic, I'm in the head. What can I contribute to this problem? And I think it's a bit of showing the strategy, showing the direction. We have built this mobile platform where we now have also an electrodialysis system that we can put in. We can do really good research. We can make knowledge available, accompany some of the transfer. It's not really our job to start companies and do the implementation, but I've always been wanting to work with a partner who's keen to do this and would like to have the support from an academic unit. Our next step, we would like to put 10 systems. That needs money, this needs people. So here, if anyone has any ideas how that could be done and would like to contribute, that would be really a nice outcome. So with that, we have this platform where we can investigate a suite of technologies. We started with nanofiltration, reverse osmosis, because it's the most simple. But I'm frustrated, as I keep saying, is what will it take to stop 1,000 kids die each day from a lack of access to safe water? So as membranologists, we have the best technology. The world has the necessary resources, but do we have the will to make poverty, says Bono, of water-related deaths history? I think that's where it is about this will and the ability. Now, we need good people. Everyone needs good people at the moment. So we have quite a few positions, especially electrodialysis. I'm looking for someone really urgently, someone who has the engineering skills. And we have many, many different models to collaborate, to visit as a PhD student, have guest scientists. So if you're interested to visit or to collaborate, please contact me. It's a very nice pleasure for us to work with other people. Of course, I have not done all this work by myself. We have a lot of collaborators. We have a lot of funding along the way, of course, never enough. And a lot of also partners who give us materials such as membranes or sensors. and of course the teams. So we've had these teams over the years, especially at KIT. I call it our big startup team of building these labs in this institute, but also the teams we've had over the years who shared amazing trips, a lot of fun, often over weekends or Christmas, because that's when we can get away with the kids during the holidays, and a lot of sponsors to work with. Desmond Tutu was someone I got to meet, and that was really the biggest inspiration. And I hope there's many more interesting people and experiences to come. Bit of advertising, nanofiltration conference next year, May to June in Taiwan. I think it would be really nice if many of you from the European Membrane Society were able to come and attend, of course, everybody else as well. And with that, I'm done. So I cannot imagine a more interesting journey. I invite you to be part of it, and thank you for your attention. And sorry again for the technical challenges.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for the nice presentation. It was really interesting to learn a lot about not only membranes, but Africa and the situation in general. Let's go through the questions. So they are all in chat. You can see it, but I will read them one by one. So first question, with your experience across different continents across the world, how this contributed to your growth as a membranologist?
So, wow, what a question. So I think it just has made it for me. I mean, think this, I always wanted to travel. And when I grew up, people were saying, well, you can only travel until you have kids. And so I jammed in as much as I did while I was a student, of course, with no money. And then we just kept going. And so meeting people and seeing this really has made me reflect and shape me. I don't know if I can describe it, but it's looking at these children. I've always tried to figure out why Africa, what makes Africa so addictive? And then you look at the kids and you see the joy in their eyes, and you just know that's it. So I would like to be able to take that on myself. I don't always manage, but it's something I would really like to bring back to the world. No, I'm not sure if that answers the question about membranologists, but I think it's about being useful. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's being more than just a membranologist, right? There is something more to it in your career. Okay, second question. Which specific membrane technique or process do you believe can grow in the coming years to challenge water supply? So membrane technique or process, upcoming years.
It's a big question, and I really think we do have the technology. Okay, we have seawater desalination, which is making a huge impact. I don't always agree with the concept. We have nanofiltration, which is, of course, the best. I mean, I'm not biased here at all. And then we have a lot of emerging technologies, and some of them may be membrane photocatalysis, but still a long way away. But I'd like to say a big but here. And by the way, I don't think MOFs are part of it. So I have a big but, because we're treating most of the water with this advanced technology to then flush the toilet with it. And I think that is the wrong concept. So I think we really need to think about how are we treating our water, and can we not maybe treat less to higher quality while leaving like a second-grade water that's untreated? Because there's energy issues, there's distribution issues, and I think maybe we need to do a bit of a rethink. And ultrafiltration is the technology for impact, because that will save the lives. And where you have things that are more dissolved, it's nanofiltration. And for the micropollutants, probably the reactive membranes.
I think that's a good answer. Yeah, I also believe that it's not only about purifying water, right? But using the right quality water for the right purpose.
Exactly.
The next question. If not for water supply, which membrane field do you believe you would be working in?
I have no idea. Yeah, I'm not sure I really understand the question, but I mean,
I guess we rephrase it that if you were not working in waters in membrane, right? And what other field would you be interested in besides water?
Yeah, look, if I had unlimited belief in my abilities, which I don't, I would probably have gone back to something like neurology, and I would have probably looked at the transfer of molecules across biological membranes, across cell membranes. I think there's a lot of secrets in this that we haven't understood yet at all. And I think that is probably a field that would really excite me. But I mean, look, it's tough, okay? It's in the interface of medicine and physics and all these things. So I think that's probably one where I could see myself in my next life.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. Okay, I think there are no more questions. So I think everyone knows how to reach you if they have any questions later on about your presentation and the technical content or anything. Thank you very much for being here today with us and giving this EMS webinar. We very much appreciate it. And for everyone else, we see you for the next webinar pretty soon. Watch out for the announcements.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.